Hi, welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to see how constructor is used in Java, and we will also briefly touch upon constructor overloading. Now, what is a constructor? We shall see that in a moment. But before we do that, let's take a look at what I got on the screen. I got two classes. I got a car class and the main class with the main method. Let's uncomment that. And then, okay, let's take a look at the car class. I got four variables of string and int type. Then I have some setters and getters. So now if you look at the main class, I'm creating an object of the car class and I'm setting the attributes like we usually do. And then I got some println lines here which will output the values as you can see on the screen. Now, what will you do if you have, let's say, 20 or 30 attributes for an object, or if you have multiple objects with the multiple attributes? One way is that you can just add multiple lines with different attributes like this. But that's just too many lines of code, and you may not necessarily want to do it this way. This is where the constructor comes into picture. Now, a constructor is in Java is a kind of a special method that is used to initialize objects. Java has even when you initialize and set the attributes the way you see on the screen like this, it does still call the default constructor in Java. The default constructor is nothing but this. This is what the default constructor. But you're not passing anything in it because you're setting the attributes separately. But an empty default constructor is called when you create an object. Now, as I've said, the main purpose is to initialize the values for the for the object you're creating. So you basically you're supplying the attributes at the time of the creation of the object itself. That is the purpose and the use of constructor. Now, if you let's take a look at let's just comment this out and then go to the car class. Let's create a constructor. Now, the constructor name should be the same name as the class name. You cannot use a different name for the constructor, so it has to be exactly same. So if I type like this, it's going to give an error because it doesn't understand. It gives you, throws you, it thinks you're trying to create a method. So it has to have the same name. Now the error is gone. You can also have an access modifier. So in this case, I put public car. So now you created an empty constructor. Not the default, but an empty. You created your own empty constructor. Okay, let's put some value in it. Some just to make sure. Empty constructor called. Another thing is the constructor cannot have a return type. Okay, so like you have void in a method or void or string or whatever you can have a return type in method but not a constructor. You can only have the access modifier, public. These are the access modifiers, public or private or protected. These are all access modifiers, and the class name. So if you go and run this now, let's uncomment this. if you run it now, you should see it's calling the constructor. You can see what empty constructor called is being printed. Now, obviously, that's not that is just to show that this is how you create a constructor. Now let's create a constructor with some actual um, values in it, and it, so do that, you have to uh, supply create the variables and pass the values to that variable, and then you have to pass those values to these variables of this class variables. So let's do that. String model int. So you create it for variables, and then you use this method. I'll tell you in a moment why we use this. Make So here you are assigning the values of these variables to the variables of the class, so that it can be used in getters or in various different methods you may want to create. There you go, that's done. So now what this would do is, when you with this constructor, you can now initialize the object with its attributes at the same time. So previously what we were doing was, okay, we have an error here. That's because you're not passing any arguments here, so it's complaining. Now, previously what we were doing was, we are creating an object, okay, create a car, okay, then you one by one, create a car object, then you saying one by one, it has to be a Honda, it has to be that model, it has to have five gears, so that should be the speed. We don't want to do that one by one. We want to do it at the time of creating the object itself. So here I would say create a car Honda, and the model hybrid, number of gears 5. This may not be the best example, but this will do. This will definitely help you understand, I hope. Okay, so now this is where you're doing. You're setting the initial values for the object attributes. You're creating an object, and then you're setting the attributes at the same time. This is the use of constructor. Okay, now if you go to car class, what is so you calling when you run this will call the constructor, and then the values from these variables will be assigned to the variables of this class. Now, why do we have to use this keyword? When this keyword is used to tell Java that these variables belong to this class. That is the use of this keyword. So that Java knows these variables belong to this class. Or another way of doing is, if you don't want to use this, you could just remove it and remove this, and then just make you can create different variable. Just give a different name here. Make your car, model of car, of car, uh, car. We can do it that way, and then just need to supply those variables here that way. Now, if you don't, if you have the same variables, you see that you have a warning here. So you're assigning the model, you're assigning it to itself. See that? That's what happens if you don't actually give this, or if you don't give a different variable name. You could do it this way. There you go. You could do it this way, or you could use this keyword. Now, if you go and run, let's run this. It should give you the same output. Yeah, obviously, if you won't have empty constructor called because I've removed that. There you go. You get the same output with using, and that's the beauty of using constructor. You can if you want to create constructor, there's a small actually tip. If you want constructors, let's just comment this out. If you want IntelliJ to create constructor, you can just right click on it and then go to generate. This way you can actually create getters or setters or the constructor. I will tell you, do you want to create constructor for all the four variables, or you can select. Again, if you want to select all of them, there you go. It's done. It's create a constructor for you. You don't have to take the pain of typing yourself. As I've said, in the same way, you can actually create getters or setters, and then you have plenty other various different options. If you haven't seen it before, you do have this option. So this is this is how you create constructors. This is a better way of coding. If you have lots of attributes, if you have to set various attributes, many different attributes for the object you're creating. So as I've said, it's something that people use in their everyday programming life. Okay, now that is about the constructor. Now, one thing you have to remember always: the constructor is called only once, only at the time of the creation of the object. So that is something you have to bear in mind. Now let's take a look at constructor overloading. So it is similar to method overloading. So you overload a constructor when obviously you need to have more than one constructor in order to overload. So if you the reason why you use constructor overloading is say you want to if you want to have a different ways of initializing an object using different number of parameters. So you have a constructor, let's say with two parameters, or you have an empty parameters, and then which will have some which you want to use to assign some default values. Or if you want to have a constructor with, let's say, two parameters, another one with three parameters, another one with four parameters, you can have this no limit to the number of constructors you can create. Then we, if you're in a situation where you need to initialize the object using different number of parameters, then you must do constructor overloading. Is similar to as we do in with method overloading. So if you call if an empty constructor is called, you want to set some default values, which you will pass to the major constructor, which will then do all the initialization of the values. So when you have multiple constructors, you should have or you will have a major constructor where you do all the initialization. So you will call this major constructor from other constructors. I'll show you with some examples in a moment. So okay, let's do that. Let's get rid of all these, and then go to let's keep this constructor. This will be our major constructor. Let's create an empty constructor. Not really an empty. When I say empty constructor, it doesn't accept any values. That's what I meant to say. That is an empty constructor. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create some. Okay, now if you look here, what we're doing here is we are this is an empty constructor with it not accepting any values from at the time of creating the object, but that the empty constructor what you created will get called at the time of the creation of this object. So what this actually do is this is a case where let's say you don't know the make of the car or the make of the model, or if you want to set this just to make it more meaningful, let's say default make. So if you don't pass any, if you do not initialize the values for your attributes at the time of creation of the object, they should take the default values. Okay, so gears, let's say 5, speed, let's say 100 miles per hour. Okay, that's the default values if you don't supply anything. So what this will do is the control comes here when you create the object. This constructor will be called, and using this keyword, that is the key here. This keyword, this is actually slightly different to the use of the keyword of this keyword we discussed earlier. This keyword is used in the context of constructor, is used to call another constructor. So you're calling another constructor, which is this constructor, within this constructor. That's what you do. That's what you're doing with this keyword. That's the purpose of this keyword. Okay, so don't be confused. You're calling another constructor within this constructor. Okay, let's see how it works. Just to be clear. You can see the values being printed. This default value, default model, for a number of gears 5, and the speed 100. And you're not supplying anything here in the constructor. But since you have a default constructor here, and then you're passing these default values, this will call this major constructor and then assign the values to the class variables, and then that gets printed. When you call the get make, get model, gear, and speed, those values get printed. Now this is constructor overloading. Another way of doing is Let's comment that out. Let's accept two, let's create two parameters. Okay, string make string. So we'll accept these two. The other two we will leave as default. Okay. So now what you will do is so here we're passing we are initializing the object and with just two attributes. The other two would be the default. So let's this do the same way with make and model. We'll pass those values which we supply at the time of the creation of the object. Then the other two we would supply. These are the default values. So they're not strings, so this would still work the same way. And let's also put a println in there. First constructor called major constructor called. Okay, now let's see what happens. So here obviously you need to supply the model, those two parameter values. So let's supply Honda. Just copy and paste. There you go. So if you run this, let's see what it prints. It should pretty much behave the same way. So okay, there you go. It's printing what you supplied, and it picks up the default values from the first constructor. But here is something. You see that is printing the message from the second constructor or the major constructor first, then it's actually printing the first constructor, even though it is the first constructor which is called. Let's see why it does that. Okay, that's because you can't put this. You cannot, if you do this, this will actually error. See that? You have an error here. So that, see, the call to this must be the first statement in the constructor body. So you can't have the println as the first line. That is why you get that. So when you create the object, the control comes here, and then here this will actually call this constructor, and then it will print this first. Then it comes back here and prints this. That's why you see the message being printed like this. Now that is another way of constructor overloading. As I have said, you can have multiple constructors with varying number of parameters. The number of parameters should vary. It cannot be the same. So if another way of constructor overloading is we can have, let's say you have one more value. This is similar to the way we've created in gears. So in this case, you will pass gears, and here you will supply the number of gears, 6. So if you print this, that should print, okay, number of gears is 6. So You have different ways of implementing it, just not just one way of implementing the overloading of the constructor. So this is in briefly, this is how the overloading works. You can, as I've said, you can have multiple constructors. You can have one constructor call another constructor using this keyword. You have to bear in mind the keyword. This keyword is completely different to the way you use keyword to denote that a variable belongs to the class. That is different. For that you use, you use this dot. You use. So this is purely to call the other constructor. So when you create constructors, one thing to bear in mind: have a major constructor where you define, where you or do all the initialization, as I said earlier. Now you can also have a constructor, for example, let's just with assume that I have the constructor. Then I can have another constructor here. Um, okay. So here I accept just one variable, and then here I would pass okay. So another way, if you want to create another constructor, another example would be this car, which would accept just one parameter. Okay, string. This would accept only make. Okay, and then this you pass make. Then you pass a default value, say CRV. Constructor. Okay, let's print that out so we know. So that we clearly know what constructors are called and when. Okay, so you go to the main, and okay, so here what we're doing, we're creating an object of a car with, and you're passing just the make. The rest get added in the respective constructors. So when you run that, what happens is this constructor will be called, and from this constructor you're calling this constructor, and this will then in turn will call the major constructor. Okay, this is where all the initialization. So this will assign the value, or the initialization will happen here. Okay, so let's run that. Okay, you can see here CRV, that's the default value. The value supplied is Honda, the make, and these are the default values again. So like this, you can have you can have create multiple constructors and for different purposes. Now you can see it calls the major constructor first, and then the the first, actually I should have changed the name, but you know which one it is, and then the first one. So how the way it um, works is this constructor is called, and this will call this constructor, and then this will call this constructor. it will do it will assign all the initialization, then that gets printed, it comes back here, that gets printed, then it comes back here, and that gets printed. That's why it is printing in the reverse order. So that is how you overload constructors in Java. I hope the video is being useful. So I'll try to come up with more videos as and when I get time. And if you like this video and if it's been some use to you, please do subscribe, and goodbye.